Hi there, my name's William Bullock, your stress manage mentor. Today, boys and girls, I'd like to tell you a story about the day that stress saved my life. In the days of yore, many, many years ago, the early 1970s, I had a very stressful experience. But at the same time, that stress, the stress in my body, the stress in my mind, saved my life. And I'm going to share that story with you right now. A lot of people talk about stress as if it's a bad thing, but the process of stress and how it works in our body is designed to save us. It's an instinctual process that helps us to deal with situations of danger and survival. Stress and anxiety is caused by situations where this natural process starts to occur at times when it's not necessary. Not long after I started work way back in the 1970s, I used to go to a pinball parlour around the corner from my office every lunchtime and play a couple of games of pinball. This is a pretty normal thing for me to do, and I didn't really think all that much about it. On one particular occasion, things were different. I went in and I was playing my game as usual, and after a couple of minutes, I was suddenly accosted by a young skinhead. Way back in the early 1970s in Australia, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, there were a lot of skinheads and sharpies, and these thugs basically liked to beat up on people. And if you had longish hair, which I did at the time, you were a prime target. On this particular occasion, I'm playing away on my game, and this little guy comes up to me and starts pushing me around and saying, "Get off my machine," and he used much fruitier language than that, but he started pushing me around. And it got to the point where I had to defend myself. And so as I went to push him away from me, I was suddenly grabbed from behind and placed into a position, a wrestling position called a full Nelson. And this meant that my arms were up like that, with his arms up underneath me and behind my arms and under my neck. And it's a pretty tricky position to get out of. And so I was standing, and as he pulled me backwards, I had to widen the stance of my legs just to maintain my balance. And at the same time, my little skinhead friend was about to kick me right between the legs. And I had a pretty clear image of what was going to happen, and it wasn't an image that I liked. At that split second, as I thought, I'm going to die, everything changed. And the next thing I can remember is I'm running down the street with the little skinhead chasing me, and I'm running faster than I've ever run before. The other thing is I've also run quite a long way, and I have absolutely no memory of doing that. I don't know how I got out of the full Nelson wrestling hold and escaped out of the building and down the street. I figure that there's a gap in my memory of approximately 10 to 15 seconds. It could be a little bit longer, could be a little bit shorter. One way or the other, it's a fair chunk of time. And I was running for my life down the street through lunchtime crowds with this little guy chasing me. Now, as I went around the corner, I passed two policemen who were standing on the corner eating their lunch. And as I heard the little guy stop when he saw the cops, I just kept going. And I got back to the safety of my office and managed to calm down a bit, even though I spent most of the afternoon in shock. Now, there are a couple of points to take from this. The first important thing is that my instinctual defense mechanism for flight, to flee the situation, kicked in. And this is one of the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And in this case, it was probably a combination of fight and flight. Somehow I managed to squirm my way out of the wrestling hole, get out of the building and run for my life. But as I say, I have no memory of it. And when the adrenaline kicked in and gave me the strength, the agility to be able to do that, it actually overrode my conscious mind. And I have no memory of that period whatsoever. And to me, that's the really interesting thing. That's how powerful this stuff is. It's incredibly powerful. If we just take the case of fight and flight, these are the most noticeable reactions that our body has when it's in a stress situation. And in the situations that I just described, it was exactly the right thing to do. I fought my way out of the hold and I fled. In fact, I'm not even sure exactly how it happened. I have no memory of it, as I said, and I can only guess at what actually happened. That's a pretty good assumption, but I really have no memory of it. And even with the work that I've done with people with memory problems and things like that over the years, I can't work it out for myself. I can guess what happened, but I really don't know. So the key thing here is that fight and flight are natural parts of our survival. Our body is designed to do those things in highly stressed situations. Now, where this relates to stress and anxiety as a problem for us is that when that very powerful energy, the combination of fear, the adrenaline being pumped into our body, and the cortisol effect, all of these things combine to create stress and anxiety in other kinds of situations. Perhaps someone is afraid of flying and they are told that they're going to be going on a holiday 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months into the future, where they're going to fly for however long. They might like the idea of going for a flight on a holiday, but they are afraid of flying. And every time they think about going on that flight, they get uptight, they feel stress, they worry about being there. And so what happens is over time, they start to get more and more uptight or stressed or anxious about going on this flight. And every single time they think about it, it gets worse and worse and worse. Because whatever it is that they're thinking about, whatever their fear base is, they're worrying that something's going to happen or that they're going to be sick on the flight or whatever it happens to be. From my point of view, they've hypnotized themselves into being in that state. And because they've done practice maybe for a couple of months, they've gotten really good at it. Their body is reacting as if that's a dangerous situation. And even though there are some dangers to flying in an aeroplane, it's much safer than crossing the road in most major cities. The thing is that our brain somehow gets caught up in the idea that the flight is going to be worse than anything else. So what's happening is that the stress hormones in our body are reacting and building up, and they're building up over time. And because we're not using them up, we're not burning them off, we're not actually fleeing or fighting, it just becomes a constant nagging anxiety or a high level of stress. And of course, every time they think about that situation, it gets worse. Now, there are lots of situations like this. It could be public speaking, it could be standing up in the middle of a meeting, doing a presentation, it could be just sitting around the water cooler at work, chatting to other people. All sorts of different kinds of situations can set up these situations. Fear of flying, fear of boats, it's endless. Fear of dogs, fear of birds. There's an endless supply of phobias and fears and doubts and worries that can create these kinds of reactions in our body. And it's basically because our body hasn't changed very much in at least 10,000 years, and probably much, much longer than that. So our body is still running as if we're living in caves, fighting off cave bears and saber-toothed tigers or hunting giant animals. As a result, basically, of the Industrial Revolution, when tribes and farmers, subsistence farmers, started to move into the city to get work, we became more crowded. And as we got more crowded, the social mores of day-to-day life changed, so that it became unacceptable to just get up and run away from something. We may have done that if you're outside and a cow chases you, then you might just run away, and that's a natural response. But when you're sitting in a room with a bunch of other people and there's no real reason to jump up and run away, you can't do it. And so what happens is we suppress that tension. We try to hold it inside. And because it's such a powerful energy, our body starts shaking, or it might, we might get tunnel vision. We might find our mouth feeling really dry, or our tongue filling our mouth. We could have extreme sweatiness. There are, again, numerous symptoms and effects that can happen as a result of this stress, because basically we're trying to hold this tremendous energy inside. And just as I described with fleeing from the skinhead and the sharpie, I used up the energy. It wasn't held inside and didn't have anywhere to go. It was focused on survival. But when this kind of energy, this incredibly powerful energy, is suppressed or pushed down or denied, then it can cause long-term problems. And that's really what we're looking at here, finding ways to change that. Now, the really interesting thing is that one of the best ways of dealing with that stress, that tension, that anxiety, whatever it is you want to call it, is simply by taking a few deep breaths. Now, a lot of people talk about stress as if it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing when it works, when it's doing what it's supposed to do, that natural response that I spoke about earlier on. But when it's suppressed, then it becomes a problem. When we get that shock, when we are in that stress type situation or worrying about it, usually what happens is that we start to breathe very shallowly. Our heart subsequently starts to beat faster, particularly if we've gotten a fright or a shock from it. And this cuts down the amount of oxygen getting into our brain, so we can't think as clearly. So these three things cause even further tension. And because we're also suppressing that energy, it just magnifies itself and goes round and becomes the classic vicious circle. Now, we need to create an interference pattern with that level of stress. The easiest way to do it is by breathing. The one thing in our autonomic nervous system that we can actually do something about is our breathing. It's very hard to, without a lot of practice, it's very hard to change your heart rate. It's pretty much impossible to change your degree of digestion. The one functional piece that we can actually override is our breathing. And this is what we need to do to deal with these kinds of high stress situations where we're feeling anxious or stressed for no real reason, particularly anxiety, stress, whatever you want to call it. So the trick is to practice relaxing when you don't need it. If you tend to have these kinds of stress or anxiety feelings, it's really important to do something about it when you're in a reasonably calm state. By sitting down, getting comfortable, closing your eyes, taking 3 nice big deep breaths, you can start to learn to deal with this stuff because you practice it when you don't need it. If you only ever practice your relaxation when you're already in a high stress situation, it's never going to be as effective. It'll help to some degree, but it's never going to be as effective because it's not practiced, it's not automatic, it's not natural for you to do it. So I recommend that you take the time to practice the relaxation exercises that I've got on other videos here on my channel, or this basic process I'm going to show you right now. And it's very simple. I recommend that when you take these 3 deep breaths, you breathe in and out through your mouth for those 3 deep breaths. And the reason I recommend this is because when you breathe in like this, Hold it at the top for a moment and then exhale. What you're doing is you're filling up your lungs with oxygen. Now, when you breathe in like that, particularly through your mouth, you can get a lot of oxygen very quickly. If you compare it with breathing in through your nose like this, certainly you can do it, but it's easier to do it in through your mouth for those 3 deep breaths. That's all I recommend, 3. Hold it and relax. Now, by doing it like that, what's happening is you're actually expanding all the muscles in your torso. So you're pulling your diaphragm down, which means that your lungs can expand to their full capacity, because most of us are only breathing about 1/3 of our lung capacity most of the time. It expands it so that we can breathe fully. It also opens up a bit of room for our heart so it can beat a little bit more regularly, a bit more easily, without having the pressure of the other organs squishing around it, which means that that oxygen that you've just breathed in is easier for the heart to pump. And that means that the oxygen-rich blood going to your brain is flowing easily, and the oxygen in your brain allows you to think more clearly. When you're in these high-stress situations, your conscious mind really isn't in control anymore. And you might be sitting there thinking, why on earth am I feeling like this? But what's happening is that the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, have taken over your body. And your conscious and your subconscious mind, well, particularly your conscious mind, isn't really there anymore. It's not in control of the situation. And your body is merely reacting to the stimulus. And so when you do a breathing exercise like that, it fills up, allows your brain to get the oxygen that it needs, and then you can think more clearly. You can start to do something about it. So, as I say, the important thing is to practice when you don't need it. So if you know you tend towards this kind of problem, it's important to take some time to learn to do these kinds of breathing exercises, and they will make a difference. So once you've taken your 3 big deep breaths in and out through your mouth, then you just breathe normally. At that same time, you relax your body. You imagine your whole body relaxing. And you can use a visualization, or you can just progressively relax through your body. Again, see my other videos for ways of doing that. There's a 5-minute video that will take you through a very simple relaxation exercise, which is a really easy way to start doing these things. Now, if you practice regularly, at least once a day, even for 5 minutes, it's going to start to make a difference, and you're going to start to get a benefit from it. If you can do it more often, it's a good idea. And if you do feel yourself starting to worry, so you start thinking about that flight or that speech, sit down, relax, take a few deep breaths, relax your body, and imagine doing that thing the way you would like to be able to do it. So if it's flying a plane, imagine getting there, being really excited, looking forward to going on the flight, getting into your seat, clipping in, turning on the media, watching your iPhone or your iPad or whatever it happens to be, and just enjoy the flight. Ideally, if it's really a big problem, it's a good idea to go and see a therapist who can help you to deal with these kinds of things more effectively. If it's a speech, say you've got to give a speech and you're worrying about that, the most important thing in relation to doing that is to practice, to rehearse it, to write out whatever the speech is, to practice doing it. It is a performance. Do a rehearsal. Do a few rehearsals. Practice doing it. Imagine yourself doing it the way you want to be able to do it. And in this way, you'll find that it becomes easier and easier for you to do these things. By practicing the relaxation when you don't need it, you've got it when you do need it. And this is really the key to it. As I say, many people talk about stress as if it's a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when you don't understand it and you don't know how to direct that energy. If you look at it purely as energy and you decide to refocus that energy in a constructive way instead of the destructive way of worrying and being afraid and worrying about everything that happens, If you can change that energy and focus it on doing what you want, it's very powerful energy. Instead of forcing it in on yourself and worrying about things you can't really do anything about. It's no point worrying about going on a plane 6 months before you get on the plane. It just doesn't make sense. But this is what a lot of people do when they're suffering from anxiety. You redirect that energy, you focus it where you want it to go. You imagine these things happening the way you would like them to, and you rehearse it in your mind. And in this way, you're actually dealing with the stressor, the idea or the thought or the past experience that is worrying you about this upcoming situation. Perhaps you have some kind of non-specific anxiety where it just seems to be there all the time or pops up in certain situations for no real reason that you can comprehend. Then it's also a good idea to practice these techniques because they will help you to deal with those kinds of situations much more effectively than if you just try to struggle on. I hope this has been of some benefit to you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. I'd be happy to chat with you about it, or maybe you've got some ideas about other videos or other situations, specific situations that you'd like more information about. Please leave a comment below, and if there's anyone you know who may benefit from these videos, please share information about the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and like yourself. It helps me a lot to be able to get these things out to people so we can help people really take control of their own lives. I'm William Bullock, your stress management mentor. Don't get stressed about relaxing, and remember to breathe. See you next time.